Maxine Luthia, your spiritual astrologer, and welcome back to the podcast where you'll learn how to use astrology in a more empowering and soul-centered way. And in today's episode, we're talking about all things related to the sun in your birth chart. So if you're wondering, what does the sun in my birth chart mean? What does it signify? That's what you're going to get out of today's episode. So I'm going to share all those meanings with you, and I'll give some examples at the end of looking at more broadly, what does the sun mean by element in your birth chart, and give some examples there. But yeah, this is actually going to be part of a 3-episode series talking about your sun, moon, and rising. So if you've ever wanted to know what those mean separately as really key parts of who you are, rather than just being lumped all together like they usually are, I'm going to help you tease apart their differences. And by the end, I hope you'll understand after these 3 episodes how different it is if you have, let's say, a Pisces moon versus a Pisces sun or a Pisces rising. So that's my hope out of this. So you can start to peel back the layers of your birth chart and not get lost in all the details too, because your sun, moon, and rising, although you have tons of planets, tons of points in your chart you can look at, this is always something you want to come back to in your chart. It's like coming back to center, really making sure that although there's a lot of moving parts in your chart, your sun, moon, and rising, each of them carries so much weight. Think of them as almost weighing double another planet. And I'm simplifying here, but I really want you to start to see how important your sun, moon, and rising are. And you may have heard people asking, or maybe you do yourself, you know that the sun, moon, and rising are important. You've heard people ask you, what are your sun, moon, rising? And sometimes people think it's the same thing. If you have your sun in the sign versus moon or rising, and I really want you to understand how different it is. So yeah, that's what you're going to get out of not only today's episode looking at the sun, but then I'll do the same for an episode next on the moon, and then next again on your rising. So yeah, that's what we're going to get into. And I do want to say throughout as well, there's a really great question Nicole asked actually, and this is over on Instagram. If you're wondering, you can follow me there, and I like to just ask you questions for these. They're a little more interactive. But Nicole asked, I'd love to know which, in your opinion, sun, moon, or rising sign is most prominent in a person and why. And this is really important to know that it depends. And I know that's an obnoxious answer, but here's why. Because first of all, everyone's chart is so unique. Your birth chart is totally unique to you. And yes, you have a sun, a moon, and a rising, but based on your chart setup and the signs those fall in, the houses, the aspects they're making, everything as a whole, there's so many factors that could suggest that actually you relate more to your sun throughout your life. Like that's just something that is stronger in your chart, for example, whereas someone else could really relate more to their moon or their rising. And so that's the first piece. And if you're interested in that, like the deeper side of that, it's something I get into really in depth inside of Spiritual Astrology School. You have modules to actually go through there's so many different components you want to check. And I kind of walk you through how you can find your chart signatures, the strengths of planets and signs, that kind of thing. But that's part of it. Your chart setup will tell you, actually, everyone has a different propensity to relate more to a sun or a moon, that kind of thing. But then the other layer to it is it depends what phase of life you're in. So maybe, for example, everyone when we're younger, we relate a lot to the moon, as you'll see, and I'll get into this in the next episode. But because those emotional needs, the nurturing that you need as a child relates to the moon. So people tend to gravitate toward their moon, okay, when they're a child. And so on and so forth. So we'll talk about that inevitably too, but keep that in mind. And then the last thing is it depends on your upbringing, your experience with family, with teachers, with friends, with your culture, religion, all of these different ways of seeing the world and experiences that you have that also interacts with your birth chart, right? Like your birth chart isn't just in a vacuum. You actually are experiencing all these other factors that shape you. And so, let's say that you have a fire sign sun or a Leo sun. Well, yeah, okay, you could be very gregarious and open, but also if you're a woman, for example, that's not always acceptable in some cultures or ways of life in society to really put yourself out there and to be loud and to take up space. And so that might be a shadow part of your chart that you want to investigate and work at opening up to more and allowing yourself the ability to express that and gain the confidence that comes through expressing your birth chart more. So I just wanted to start there at the beginning to kind of complicate things before I get more in depth. But so as you listen, I really would like to just offer it up as a challenge to you to meditate on this when I'm telling you about the sun today. Really play into your chart. Have that up. Look at your friends, your partners, your family members, and see what comes up for you. Do you relate to your sun? Do you not? How does that show up not only within yourself, but in your life? What are the messages you've received about that? Was it okay to show up that way? Was it not? So allowing yourself to remember that your sun, moon, and rising, they're not always going to be, you're not always going to feel all of them equally the same throughout your life. It will fluctuate. But at the same time, they all need to be in harmony for you yourself to feel that inner harmony and peace. Okay, so we're looking for the goal of, yes, they're all of equal importance. However, they don't all have to be felt as strongly. Like you're not doing anything wrong or bad if you don't relate to your sun sign. Okay, that's actually, as you'll see, something you're here to grow into. So that actually makes sense. All right, so that's what I wanted to share at the start. And now we'll get into the significance of the sun in your birth chart in today's episode. And then I'll get into the moon and your rising in the next episodes. And just a reminder also at the start, before I get into it, if you do want to find out how to learn more astrology with me, to book a reading with me, or sign up for the next round of Spiritual Astrology School, which the fall semester starts September 1st, and I'm about to open doors for that in early August, so I'm so excited about that. But that's all linked in the show notes for you, and you can also, of course, reach out to me with any questions. I'd love to hear that. And last thing too, if you haven't yet, you'll see a link below to my free astrology basics cheat sheet, so if you're new to all of this, I recommend you start there. Okay, so let's talk about your sun in your birth chart. So what does it represent? What does it mean for you, really? And oftentimes, just as an entry to this topic, when you first learn astrology, you learn to answer the question, what is your zodiac sign, with your sun sign, and you say, I am a Taurus, I am a Gemini, an Aquarius, a Leo, whatever your sun sign is, right? And even that phrase, I am, it allows you to start to understand, it's an entry point to understanding actually what is the meaning of your sun. And it is an affirmation of who you are. Just like affirmations, you start with the same phrase, I am, very common, right? And so in astrology, when we are talking about your sun, although it's much more than just your sun sign, that gives us an entry point to understand your sun is about identity. It's about your sense of self, of who you are, but also who you are here to grow and evolve into. And it shows you almost using, your birth chart itself, especially when we're talking about your sun, moon, rising, and your personal planets too, we could expand to here. It's allowing you to see what are these personality traits in a way, but it goes deeper when we look from a spiritual perspective. It unfolds to tell you, well, actually, you chose your birth chart for a reason, and you have this sun sign with these identity traits to grow and evolve into and adapt to express your purpose, right? So it's not just random. It's allowing you to see, oh, wait, this is my sun sign for a reason, because your sun sign traits and qualities and the strengths of that, when you really develop that, that's when you allow yourself to carry your purpose forward through who you are, through your energy, your essence. It just radiates out into the world. And it allows you to really make sure that you are allowing your purpose to move through you, through your identity. All right. So thinking about it that way is really helpful because it gets you beyond just this idea of thinking like it's a personality test when you look at your birth chart, and it allows you to see, oh wait, it's actually telling you about your soul, and your sun, moon, rising are sharing how can you start to embody that. And your sun is really a big catalyst for that. It's kind of, it's not just your sun. And it's easy to try to just want to simplify things and say, oh, your sun is this, your moon is this, your rising is this. And it's helpful to tease them apart. But I do want you to keep in mind, it's always, as I said, depends on what phase your life is in, but also what are you acting out now? And it all kind of blends together in a way. All right. So your sun is a lot about your sense of self. It's who you are, expressing yourself creatively as. It kind of has that main character energy in some ways. It shows what are those qualities that really you're here to embody so you can live out your purpose. And so, yeah, in that sense, it's really like this story of yourself. And that gets me into the idea, too, when we're talking about the sun is the center of our solar system. And so in astrology, it has that crossover, right? Like you wouldn't be able to be listening right now to this podcast episode to me, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. You wouldn't be living your life if the sun didn't exist, because the sun gives us energy, light, life force, and it creates life on this planet. So your sun in your birth chart as equally as important, as above, so below. So the central sun in our solar system, in your birth chart, it shows themes of central importance, activities of central importance. So you might notice that, yes, you identify with your sun sign in some ways. It, yes, also shows you how you can start to embody your purpose more and live that out and radiate that out. But it also speaks to what are those key kind of clues to your purpose, right? So if you are a Cancer sun, yes, you might be nurturing. That's the personality side. But also it's true that themes of family or home might factor really big in your life. Those are themes you're learning to really adapt, evolve in your lifetime to live out the life you came here to live, all right? Or likewise, just to give another example, if you are, let's say, a Gemini sun, well, you came into this lifetime to use communication as a big tool for yourself. Your multi-passionate nature, that's something you need to learn to embrace rather than make yourself wrong for that. Or also, rather than stepping into the shadow of that, like gossip, for example, for a Gemini sun. Or, so it's important that as you're thinking about your sun, yes, it's about your identity and how you can embody your purpose, but it also very obviously can point to themes and activities and, different parts of your life that you want to pay attention to, because there's gold for you there. All right. The sun also relates to gold. So there's, again, so much I can get into this, but your sun really is that important and that obvious. And even the house that your sun falls in is so revealing. It's so obvious. Like if you have your sun in the 10th house, career might be a huge focus. It's where you pour a lot of your energy into, whatever house your sun falls in. It's really important that you lean into that for developing a sense of self-esteem even, and your life force wants to act itself out there. It wants to express creatively who you are in this world in that area of life. So as another example, if you have your sun in, let's say, the 8th house, maybe you really want to dive deep into topics like learning about astrology might be one of those that helps you better understand not only your purpose, but your sense of self, right? Those topics related to the house are going to help you discover who you are. And likewise as well, if we're talking about the sun, bringing it back around to the sun represents life force. And in your birth chart, again, also life force. So it's a big part of your energy, your essence, prana, chi. And it really helps you when you're looking at your sun. And in someone who is fully embodying their sun, you feel that. You feel that in their essence, their vibration. And that's where it comes to. People always ask, oh, can you guess someone's sun sign? No, but I can, yes, if, you can feel it, and it kind of takes the guessing out of it if someone is really, really not blocking their sun. And usually people do come into this later in life. It's said to be like around your 30s and 40s. It really comes into fruition more. And there's a whole nother more astrology behind that. But just understanding that your sun is a part of yourself that you are here to grow and evolve into. And the more you do, the more you let that energy of the sun flow, the happier you will be. And that's the simplicity of it too. Your sun gives you energy. So if you're feeling drained, if I have someone come to a reading and they just feel really down, and, it can be as simple as looking in their birth chart to say, hey, lean more into these activities. A sun in the 5th house, what hobbies do you have? Have you been, do you have a creative outlet? And it can be that simple as, oh, they just need to lean into that energy and let it flow. It's like just a river that's been blocked up, and they just need to allow themselves to express that energy in a healthy way rather than have it cause them stagnation. So again, there's always going to be all these different factors to any planet, but hopefully that gives you an idea of how you can start to use your sun as more than just your identity, but seeing it as your energy, your life force, and recognizing that the more you lean into that and cultivate your sun by sign, by house, looking at aspects, it allows you to connect more to why you're here, your purpose, and this desire to express your soul's purpose. And how do you go about doing that, right? So yeah, your sun is really like, what did your soul come here to experience in life? And how can you lean into those qualities, activities, traits, themes, all of that you are learning to develop within yourself in the highest possible way? So for example, a Scorpio sun, right? You're learning here in this lifetime about your inner power. And oftentimes there might be on the shadow side some struggle there, some power struggles even. But then on the flip side of that, the highest expression is really learning to master that and to use that in a way that feels healing, and the transmutation that can take place with that. And likewise, like a Sagittarius sun, okay, this is a lifetime where on the shadow side, you might feel that it's a bit scattered in some way, or you're always seeking your freedom, or feeling in some way that has been a challenge for you, because there's challenges with your sun sign. But the more you grow and evolve into it, that's where you unlock really understanding your truth, exploring beliefs, and having adventure that it fuels you in your purpose. It's a part of why you're here. So again, just really allowing yourself to even contemplate and meditate on this. What are the themes of your sun sign? What are the themes of even the element it's placed in? So I'll get into that next, but that is so important. And then looking to that house, that can be so obvious as well, to say, oh, the themes of this house, how does that relate to my identity? How does that relate to what brings me this sense of life force, of vitality? And how can I radiate that out into the world more, and not block myself there or limit myself? And then the last thing I want to talk about here today is just talking about the shadow side of this. So briefly, you are here to grow and evolve into your sun. And you will identify with, let's say, those themes of your sun. But on the flip side, you want to be mindful that you're not over-identifying with your sun. So I'll talk about this as I go through the different elements now, because ego in an unhealthy way, that's the shadow of your sun. A healthy ego is what we want. Yes, you are a soul, but you are here as a human, so you need to be able to use your birth chart in a way that's in harmony with that and allows you to express why you're here. Okay, so let's take a minute and just look at some questions that you wrote in to me over on Instagram about your sun. And then I will get into, what does your sun mean by element? What are the strengths and shadows to be mindful of there? So I have 3 questions for you. that you had for me, I guess I should say. And the first question, Ricky writes in and asks, I'm a late degree Leo, so Leo sun, and a Virgo moon. So does that mean I should check a lot of Virgo? And this is such an important question. So if you've ever heard someone ask, or tell you that they're born on a cusp, that means that they're born right as the zodiac seasons are transitioning. So their sun could be, in this case, a late degree Leo sun or an early degree Virgo if they're born mid to late August. But at the end of the day, it's okay to say that you're born on a cusp. And it helps actually as you get into deeper astrology. If you're born at a late degree sun sign, you might relate a little bit more to the qualities of the next sign. So Ricky, you are right that you relate a lot to your moon sign. But everything that I talked about earlier related to your sun, you want to really pay attention to whatever sign that sun falls in. Even if it's at the last degree of the sun sign, even if it's at the first degree, no matter where it's at, look up your birth chart. Again, I have that linked below, and make sure that you see what zodiac sign, what house does your sun fall in. And this is very cut and dry. So it's kind of like, if you, I grew up in Wisconsin. So if I'm in Wisconsin, even if I'm looking across the border at Illinois, I'm still in Wisconsin. So you still have to pay attention to those rules in Wisconsin, those laws, right? And that's kind of the same thing here. Just a nice metaphor to simplify things is that your sun sign, your house that your sun falls in, you want to pay attention to that one. You're not like half Leo, half Virgo if you're born on a cusp. And I actually gave a reading to someone the other day who thought they were a Taurus their whole life and recently found out they're actually a 0-degree Gemini sun. And as you now know, your sun relates to in a big way how you can learn to express and radiate out your purpose. So it's so important you know that so you're following the right map, okay? And then when also the other part to that question is, of course, like the Virgo moon, it makes sense if you might relate more to one sign of your sun, moon, rising than another, but they're all important for in their own right, in their own reasons. And when I get into the moon, you'll understand, that's where I express that Virgo energy, and that's why you might relate to it more. Okay? All right, so again, they're all equal, sun, moon, rising. It's important that you embody them all for whatever signs and houses and stuff they fall in. Okay, so Laura's question next. She says, I still check all 3, sun, moon, and rising for forecasts. Should they all resonate? All right, so you may have your whole life been checking your sun sign for horoscopes and that kind of thing, but when it deals with timing, most people just only know their sun sign. They don't know they have a rising sign. So that's why they don't check for their rising sign. But the way horoscopes are written and a lot of timing sensitive astrology, you do want to first look to your rising sign. Okay, then if you resonate with your sun and moon, it makes sense because again, they are that important, so you will relate to some transits to that, but honestly, when you're looking at the rising sign, that's going to correlate most with your house system, and that's how horoscopes are written by astrologers. So short answer is look to your rising sign, your sun and moon maybe for sub-themes. Okay, sub-themes, that was hard to say there. Okay, so last question. I actually got asked a couple of questions all around the lines of like, do you grow more into your sun as you age? Do you present more as that over your rising or over your moon? And again, I mentioned this at the start, you grow and evolve into your sun. But I want to just be wary of this comparison of pitting your sun against your moon or rising because really, it's meant to be this expression of all 3, a harmony of sorts. And as I mentioned at the start, there's reasons why at any one point in time you might identify with one more than the other, but they all are important. And it depends on which one you are most identified with to see what one are you actually going to express out into the world and what do other people see in you. And that even gets into synastry and all this other fun stuff. But yeah, your sun, it is something that you tend to identify with more, especially in midlife. And as you really just come to know yourself. If you think about that, like when you are younger, you don't always identify with, you don't know who you are yet, right? And so the more you grow into knowing who you are and letting yourself discover that, that speaks to your sun, that journey of self-discovery, of soul discovery. So now that we have that out of the way and you know at a deeper level what the sun represents in your birth chart and also the answers to those questions, just to clarify some things, let's look at what does your sun mean by element. And this is referring to the zodiac sign that your sun is placed in. So if you have, for example, an Aries sun, that's going to be a fire element sun sign. And I'll walk you through all of those as we go in, but your sun will be, I'll call it out so you know if you don't know the elements. But just so you know as we go through this is what you want to really look at first in your birth chart. What element does your sun sign fall in? So I'm going to share that with you here in this episode. And if you wanted to know the next steps, then you'd want to look at what specific zodiac sign, what house does it fall in, is also really important, the aspects, but we're going to start here, okay? So the element that your sun falls in is so important because it begins to kind of allow you to see how you are who you are, not only at a personality level, but understanding the soul evolutionary intent of that. And it allows you to see that people need to be diverse. They need to be different. And you don't want to convince your partner to be who you are or more like you. You want that difference because you're each on your own path in that way. And it gives you a different perspective of knowing the element of someone's sun even. Oh, that's what they're here for. That's who they need to be. That's who they need to express as. And you learn to not take that so personally when that conflicts with your own, and you can kind of hold that separation and that spaciousness. Okay, so thinking about that as we go through it, maybe you're thinking about not only your chart, but looking at your sun sign, your partners, your love interest or colleague, family member, friend, so on. Okay, maybe even someone you don't get along with, it can help you to understand why. All right, so with your sun, I want to start with the fire sign sun. So this is if you have your sun in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius. And this is really where you're learning to identify, really learning to master your energy flow. And you might be at the personality level a bit more high energy or action oriented, more courageous and, maybe enthusiastic or creatively expressive, but at the soul level, the reason why is because you really are here to show up really big in life, to allow yourself to really be authentic and to drop the filter and just be who you are. And the shadow of this is you don't want to over-identify with what you're doing or over-identify with needing to be on all the time so much that you burn out. That's a big, something you have to be mindful of if you have your sun in Aries, Leo, or Sagittarius, because you might be giving and being very generous, but you need to know that we have limits as humans too. You have to make sure that you're feeding your energy into what lights you up, not just giving that away like willy-nilly, okay? So that's a little bit about fire sign suns. I would say some of you wrote in asking, someone actually wrote in, Katie did, with a triple fire sun, moon, rising. She has a Leo sun, Aries moon, and Sag rising, and said that she didn't identify with like being bold and brave and kind of those themes that some of them I mentioned, but it can also be softer. It can be more subdued. It can look like being very warm, being very giving, as I shared, or more spontaneous, or, very supportive and encouraging, inspiring in some way of others. So that when we're talking about the fire sign, just keep in mind it's a spectrum. So you can think about someone like with a fire sign who, like Lady Gaga or Madonna or Nicki Minaj, who might feel like they really unapologetically own that, but it's a spectrum of sorts. And again, I mentioned this at the start, I believe, but just oftentimes I do notice that when giving readings to people with fire signs, you have to also work through, are there any blocks? Are there any limits that you have to, with a fire sun, just kind of burn through that to get back to who you actually are and shine that into the world? All right, so next up, we're going to take a look at air signs because they are kind of similar to fire signs, as you'll see, in that they're very outwardly expressive in some sense. And in this way, though, it's more so channeled through the mind. So if you have an air sign sun, that's Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius, this is where you might be more ideas oriented. You're really mastering the mind, mastering your thoughts, your way of speaking. Maybe, that can look a lot of different ways, but communication is at the core of that. And your challenge is not to over-identify with your thoughts or over-identify with your social relations or relationships. That's another part of the air sign suns. But the beauty there is you're really here to learn and to grow into your own wisdom. And so that just keeping that in mind, like, okay, this is, again, a part of yourself that you're here to embody, and it's showing you what are those different qualities that you can start to embody and embrace more in your own unique way. So it might be if you have an air sign sun, you think differently, you see things from a different perspective, or you're learning a lot about who you are through your connections with others, okay? And then if you are an earth sign sun, this is Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, this is a lot about really finding your way of expressing yourself in this material world and mastering your resources, security, and it's very wanting to be grounded and knowing your innate value and knowing your sense of who you are, and feeling secure with that, being okay with being yourself. And oftentimes there is like a lot of staying power, wanting to build things like from the ground up. And the challenge here, the risk is you don't want to over-identify with what you're creating and what you've built to the sense that you think you are your things you possess or the thing that you got and earned. It's more so seeing and having fun and kind of playing with this and not taking yourself so seriously. So that's kind of the shadow there that, again, with all of these, there's the strengths that you want to really lean into and in the sense of developing your purpose, but then also there's kind of the banana peel in the way of just what do you want to make sure you're not tripping up on. Okay, and then next for water sign suns, this is if you are a Cancer, Scorpio, or Pisces sun. This is very feelings oriented. So you might really be learning a lot about your inner emotional world. And that, again, relates to your purpose. And so you might be someone who appears personality-wise very sensitive, or in some way there's big emotions. And you might be curious about, okay, how do you really feel? What's going on underneath that? And so there is that sense of being also a bit more reserved as well as part of this. But at the soul-centered perspective, it's also seeing, okay, but they're here to really learn to not over-identify with how they're feeling right now, not making an identity out of how they feel or their pain or the past, and really allowing yourself to be accepting of who you are and your emotions and how that feels. So again, it is something to navigate with all of these signs where you just have to be mindful of that balancing act. But water sign suns, you're learning to master that emotional world. And it can, again, it's not always comfortable with some of these. Like you can imagine if you are a water sign sun, you're just wearing your emotions very visibly because people see that in your sun sign. It's something that's a bit more obvious rather than the moon sign qualities, for example, the element there. So something to keep in mind, but this lifetime is really about letting yourself confront and bring consciousness to these different themes by element. So bringing your conscious awareness to your element of your sun is a great place to start grounding into who you are, into understanding even your energy flow. Like you'll notice as I shared that fire and air signs are a little bit more similar in that it's energy that goes out, that seeks connection or outward expression, and, either even physically or verbally and that kind of thing. But whereas earth and water sign suns tend to be a bit more reserved or inward. It's not as simple as saying like extroverted or introverted. Again, that's going to show up in your chart as a whole, but it is showing you this layer of who you are that you need to be, that you need to start getting comfortable with and owning and not making yourself wrong for that. Sometimes with your sun, it really is this part of yourself that you've wrestled with. It's something you might have had challenges about accepting in yourself, but you're learning to be comfortable with it and also not let it be something that takes you off course by caring too much about what people think of that. So I mentioned a lot here, so I want to pause there and just let you contemplate that and really feel into what, at the level of even thinking of the element and imagining that element, holding that in your mind's eye. Are you a fire sign sun? Imagine fire. Are you an earth sign sun? Imagine what does the element earth mean to you, or water, air, and seeing how that is a part of yourself that you can really learn to lean into more and to embrace and to accept, because the more you can accept this energy, you're accepting your own essence, you're accepting who you are. And you know, that's a beautiful thing. Astrology really allows you to gain that self-awareness, and your sun is something you're here to be more consciously aware of. So even if you've seen astrology memes where they tend to talk about, you know, sometimes the shadows, when you're reading for your sun sign, you can just kind of laugh it off. Whereas if you read for your moon sign, you might be a bit like, ooh, that, you know, hit a little close to home there, because it's something with your sun that is a bit more on display, that you are aware of the shadows and the strengths. And we're constantly working at how can we not judge ourselves when we go off course, when we step into the shadows, but learn to integrate and embrace that, as that's just part of us. But also we have a choice, and how can we work at expressing the strengths and taking the high road of our sun sign, because that's going to really help you get closer to feeling happy, feeling fulfilled, being more on purpose. Okay, so that's it for today's episode. I hope it helped you make sense of what your sun really is telling you in your birth chart, and how you can work at embracing that part of yourself more. And if it was a helpful episode for you, I'd of course love to know. So feel free to message me on Instagram if you want to give it a 5-star review, this podcast. I would be so grateful. And of course, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on any future episodes. Next week, I'll be talking about your moon and then your rising. And I'll kind of be going back and forth now that you know what the sun means, so we can tease out more of the differences. And last thing, if you want to learn more astrology with me, book a reading with me, or sign up for Spiritual Astrology School, which I'm so excited for, I'll leave all of that linked below for you. And of course, you can reach out to me on Instagram if you have any questions in particular. And okay, that's it for today's episode. Thanks so much for learning astrology with me. So grateful you're here. And yeah, until the next episode. Bye.